Welcome to Bluespring Out Loud. My name is Harold Buckner, and I lead business consulting for Bluespring Wealth Partners. And I'm so excited today to be joined by Quint Tatro. Quint is the founder of Joule Financial and the creator and host of a top-rated personal finance podcast called DIY Money. And today we're going to learn how Quint and his team built DIY Money into an industry-leading podcast. Welcome, Quint.
Hey, thanks, Harold. Good to be here. Appreciate it.
Hey, we're so excited to have you today. And would like to start out, just share a little bit about Quint Tatro and Joule Financial.
Yeah, so Joule Financial is an independent RIA. We joined Bluespring March of 2022. We service geographically the central Kentucky region. We're based in Lexington, but we have clients all over the United States, part of which we're going to obviously talk about today and how that came to fruition. We are planning-focused, planning-centered firm with an emphasis on obviously fee-only investment advisory. Thereafter, a pretty small team. There's 5 of us in the office full-time with another ancillary sort of part-time advisor, and growing the business exponentially over the last several years, and certainly look to continue in the future.
Your firm has a tremendous growth trajectory and a presence that's so much bigger than Lexington, Kentucky. You're nationwide. So tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea to start the podcast.
So, yeah, media has always been in our DNA in the firm. We really grew locally as an advisory firm through radio, local radio. We were involved in an talk show sort of format. We were a regular guest on one of the more popular conservative talk show hosts programs here in the city of Lexington. And I've done that for 20 plus years. I'm a CNBC commentator. I started doing CNBC in 2008, I believe it was. So I've been doing that a very long time. So media has always been sort of in our DNA and an opportunity we felt to educate folks. So we don't, I hate to use the term market because we don't advertise our services. We go on to these outlets and we really try to communicate and articulate what might be going on in the industry, in the financial markets or the economy in a plain vanilla sort of Main Street way for our folks to understand. And that's always seemed to resonate. That's helped us quite a bit. About 4 or 5 years ago now, I took some time away. Like a lot of folks in the industry, after 20 plus years in the business, I felt as though we were sort of, and personally speaking, I was sort of plateauing in what we were doing. And I wanted to really get away and spend some personal time and personal reflection. I encourage everybody to do that. I'm sure you've done that, Harold, in your successful business career, just to take personal time away, spend time reflecting on what you've done and where you're going with your life, and maybe change course if you need to. So I spent some time out there. Personally, I dovetailed a client meeting that I had down in the Florida region and went to the beach just myself for a couple days. And I spent time really thinking about, okay, what does my life look like and what am I doing? And one of the things I kept coming back to is that over the last several years prior to that little getaway, our firm had grown and wonderful things were happening, but I felt as if our service to people was starting to wane. We were more interested and really geared towards the higher net worth individuals. And certainly we love helping those people, but there was a dire need. There is a dire need, still is, in my opinion, to help people on the personal finance level. There's a few folks doing it well, the Dave Ramseys of the world, Susie Orman, et cetera. But I personally have always felt like they didn't identify well with me. I don't know. I just always felt like they maybe spoke a little different language, and so I felt there was a niche and a need. I'm sorry, a niche, a need to be a niche in the industry, and just have a little bit of a different voice. And so I came away from that weekend, and I thought to myself, okay, we're gonna take the success we've had in the industry, and we're going to start a service project, and we're gonna start a podcast, and we're going to really start to voice a message of personal finance and practical applications and how to handle budgeting and get out of debt and all that. And again, obviously that's very far removed from sitting down with someone who has $5 million net worth and is trying to come up with complex tax strategies. So this was totally different. This was not a This was not any at all an ability to grow our business. This was just an ability for me to say, how do I find more meaning in what I'm doing? How do I serve more people? How do I help people? And I'll never forget, because Daniel, especially if you listen to the podcast, our personalities are quite a bit different. And so I remember texting him while I was away. It was like a day in, and I said, "Okay, I've had an epiphany. We need to help more people. We need to service more people, and we need to do it. Not our clients, not people that we would expect to be clients." And I said, "I'd like to start this podcast. I've come up with an idea named DIY Money." I mean, I was just ranting. I was so excited, page after page. And of course, Daniel's response was like, "Yeah, that's cool." And I was like, "No, you don't understand. This is going to be the greatest thing ever. Like, we need to do this." Blah, blah. And he was like, "Okay, yeah, well, let's talk about it when you get back." And I'm like, "Oh," I got so angry, but that was Daniel. That's always been Daniel. I'm a visionary and entrepreneur, and want to run 100 miles in one direction, and Daniel helps sort of figure out how to actually make that work. So I came back, and from that time, and I had laid out a little business plan, and we'd spent some time. And when the idea didn't die, right, when it didn't just kind of become a fading in the wind of a kind of a fleeting idea, and it became this real thing. Next thing you know, we had gotten some time in a local radio station, again due to our connections in the radio space, to actually cut a podcast inside the radio. I knew that podcasts had to have, there was a couple qualities, and one is solid audio, right? You want to have really good quality audio, and so I knew that we could do that at a very low cost. And so we went in and cut a podcast. And initially, this was the interesting thing, Harold, is that initially the podcast format, the DIY Money format that is today, was not the first few episodes. The first few episodes was a traditional, a couple of guys sitting around, advisors, talking about a strategy, right? Like, oh, let's talk about Roth IRAs and why they're good and how you should do them. And let's talk about credit card debt. And after about 2 or 3 episodes, Daniel, was really good. And he's saying, "Okay, what are we going to talk about over the next couple of weeks? We need to lay out a production schedule." And I wanted to gouge my eyeballs out. I was like, "This is awful. This is not going to work. Sitting down for an hour trying to develop content. I mean, this is terrible." And so I knew that the idea, the nucleus of the idea was good, but the execution at that moment was not. And so I was we were sitting there and racking brain, and out of nowhere, I mean, I had not heard of anybody doing this. And I really think it was like this light bulb, bloom went off. And I said, what if we had people send in audio questions? And we took that audio question, kicked it around, and then answered it on the podcast. And that was the podcast. And of course, Daniel said, "Well, why would anyone want to do that? Like, why would anybody send?" I said, "We'll incentivize them. We'll give them a $25, Amazon gift card or something." And so we immediately went. It was interesting. We were at a Starbucks across the street from the radio station that we usually cut the podcast at. We were just having a coffee talking about it. I called the producer. I said, "Hey, are you in there? Can we cut a 5-minute little podcast thing?" He said, "Yeah, come on by." So I went on and literally a 5, I said, "Hey, thanks so much for listening to DIY Money." There was probably 10 people listening at the time. "Thanks so much for listening to DIY Money. We're changing our format after a whopping like 3 episodes." And I said, "If you have a question, get on your phone, record it in the voice memo, email it to us. We'll give you a $25 Amazon gift card." And so that was the podcast. 5 minutes, went out. And again, we probably had friends and family and a couple randoms listening to it. Well, we got a couple questions, and that turned into a couple episodes. That turned into a couple more episodes. And we get about 10,000 downloads per episode now. And so it immediately from that point organically took off, and it's been great ever since.
Well, I'm a huge fan. I listen to the podcast every weekend when I'm out and about. Love the format. And tell us a little bit more about your co-hosts, because you've got multiple co-hosts that participate in the show. You've got Daniel, you've got Logan. You kind of kick the show off with what you call Bro Talk, which is a great way to ease into the podcast and to get to the question for the day. But talk more about your co-hosts, because they are amazing.
Yeah, first I want to touch on what you just said, though. It's kind of funny. We didn't. All of this is organic. I think some of the best ideas, I mean, again, as an entrepreneur, you'd say, well, what's the business plan? What's the schematic to make? I don't know. I mean, we just went with it. And is very, very organic. Now to the next level, we probably need to, actually put some kind of business plan in place and so forth. But neither here nor there. The quote bro talk, we would just start the podcast off. And I always felt it important. I still do. I mean, anybody in business, especially our business, that we have to be genuine. Nobody wants to hear from some guy who pretends to live in this, pedestal or on this pedestal, and it's absurd. So I wanted people to know that we're real human beings, that we have personal lives. I have 3 kids, I have a wife. Sometimes it's messy. I have personal hobbies. I run. Daniel's a coffee snob. I mean, I just wanted to talk about those things. And so every podcast I would look at Daniel, and sometimes it's like pulling teeth. I'd be like, Daniel, what's going on in your life, right? And he'd be like, nothing, or whatever. And I'd pull it out as biking. He's a cyclist. I mean, he's got some interesting things. And so we would pull that out. Well, one time we were reading reviews. I don't know if you went back and ever caught this podcast, but we were reading reviews and I was like, hey, we're getting great reviews because we jumped in the charts very quickly. We were identified as a top podcast. At one point, we were number 1 in personal finance and budgeting on iTunes and Spotify. And you really have to work at those things. We've kind of slacked off a little bit, but you really have to have people giving you reviews and sharing it. And you really have to promote that stuff. And we were doing that. And so we jumped up very quickly. So one time I was reading reviews and this was organic. I was like, what do our reviews say? And I'm on my phone and so thanks so much. Great podcast. Love the content. This is great. And then one gal was like, couple of guys, bro talk, stupid, ridiculous, could do without that. Shows for loser. I mean, just bashed us, right? I mean, 100 great reviews, 1 sour apple. And of course, everybody tells you, don't worry about the haters. Well, no, I was like, what? You bro talk? You don't like our bro talk? So that became a funny kind of ha-has. Every question thereafter, people would be like, hey, Quint, Daniel, love the bro talk, keep it coming, wouldn't be here without it. And then they'd ask their question. So it just became a funny ha-ha on that one review, right? But Daniel's a certified financial planner. He's been with me now for over 13 years. He's been a great partner in the business. And again, he's the yang to my yin or whatever. We just kind of approach things differently. But he handles our planning department. He oversees all of our complex financial retirement estate planning for our clients. And so he's very well versed and knowledgeable in the industry. And again, just his personality is quite a bit different than mine. So we approach it, a little bit differently. Logan is a junior advisor in our office, rising superstar. He actually celebrated his 2nd year with us just yesterday, mid-November. And he brings a unique, younger sort of approach. He's just getting started, recently married, still, living in an apartment, looking to save. And so again, we try to bring practical application. We don't want to be like, oh, well, the book says do this. No, I want to share with you what I'm doing. My 3 kids. Great example. Everybody asks about college funding. Well, I have 3 children and I don't use a 529. And I don't need to go into why, but I talk about that on the podcast. If you go to 90% of advisors in the country and you have children, they're going to go, well, let's talk about a 529 plan as a way of saving for college. I didn't use one, and I talk about why. And again, it's a personal application, and we'll continue that. We'll continue as our business expands and new folks come into the fold and work with our clients. We'll bring them into the podcast as well. So we certainly hope to expand that cast of characters as well.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Tell us a little bit about how the podcast has impacted your business.
So this was amazing and totally unexpected. And it was not some, bait and switch. I never even had in the back of my mind, oh, maybe this becomes a thing for our business at all. Never did. So what's happened though is as our audience has grown, certainly the demographic of our audience clearly, and I'm learning this, is not just broke millennials looking to figure out how to budget. There are some very wealthy, high income earners, sometimes young, sometimes older. We have older folks as well who listen to the podcast. And what's happened there is I believe that they've built up a level of trust and confidence and credibility in us as podcast hosts. They've clearly vetted our business and they've ultimately become clients. So we've gotten quite a few great clients from this podcast. And again, never in my wildest dreams did I expect that. There's not any set, kind of narrow demographic. I can't say, oh, a 27-year-old high income earners in the tech industry. Nope. Everyone from a 52-year-old single female living out in Northwest United States to high income young millennials that are in the tech space in Nashville. So it's quite a diverse audience, and it really has lent us to say, wow, how can we then not just double down on that, but how can we make sure that our audience is aware that we're available to be, advisors for them? So there's no secret when you hear a podcast, and if it's a question, because sometimes people will ask a question and it really is user specific. So they'll say, I need to know, should I invest in a Roth or should I keep with my traditional 401k? And we'll go through the differences and what maybe they're to think about. But you will now consistently hear me say something like, this actually would be a great question for an advisor. If you have one, great. If you don't, look us up. And so what we're going to be doing, this is totally organic. And it's been a lot of the way our firm has evolved over the years, but we are now going to shape our firm and our brand and our sort of like the way you view our firm to fit more with how the podcast is growing. So it started as, hey, we've got this established firm. We work with folks in and around the Kentucky region, high net worth, retirees, et cetera. And I want to start this service project. Well, now all of a sudden, the quote service project has become this growing organism, wonderful, large and growing rapidly podcast with a brand. How can that influence what we're doing over here to lend, to that and help people who need the, help and the advisory services from that. So it's exciting. I never anticipated it being a driver of business, but it certainly is.
That's awesome. And if there are other businesses out there that are considering starting a podcast or just expanding their media presence, what advice would you give to them?
Don't wait. Just get going. I mean, one of the interviews. So I have always, again, media has been in our DNA. And just even personally, I've always enjoyed it. And years ago, when we had a radio show, we actually did a radio show called Savings and Cents. It was a local radio show. It was great, but we realized very quickly this is not something we want to really pour resources into. It just, I don't know. It was more like forced. It was not organic and it was just forced and so forth. But I did an interview on there one time. There's an entrepreneur in our neck of the woods who started a multi-billion-dollar agricultural business in our area in central Kentucky. It's a phenomenal business. And he started with $10,000 out of his garage. And he was a local hero. He's since passed away, but he was an unbelievable local entrepreneur hero, amazing for the community. And I interviewed him in his office before he passed. It was amazing that I had the opportunity to do it. I'll never forget what he said to me, Harold. One of the things he says, my motto in life is don't worry about getting it right, just get it going. You can figure out the rightness later, right? You can figure out how to tweak it and so on and so forth. So I see so many people have paralysis by analysis. Oh, I need to start a podcast, but what would we talk about? How would we do that? Well, that doesn't make sense, blah, blah, blah. They can get on their phone. They could record a memo. They could put it up on a third-party podcasting platform. We use Podbean, Podbean. There's a million of them out there, I'm sure, and immediately have a podcast. And they could immediately be directing people to that podcast. Now, refining it, determining where it goes from there, adding production value, all that's semantics. Later, forget it, down the road. But I would encourage people, it's a great way to connect with the audience. It's cheap and it lasts. It's timeless. So when you do them, I mean, we've been doing them for years now, and it just builds up even more and more credibility. So people can go back. There's hundreds upon hundreds of episodes. It takes time, but my number one piece of advice would be don't wait, get it moving.
That's awesome. And Quint, I know you started to touch on this, but future plans, what can you share with us on how you see things evolving?
Yeah, this is interesting because I feel like as a host, I'm good at hosting and I'm not really good at anything else. So I can communicate, I can talk about what's happening in the podcast. I'm great at answering questions and so forth. As far as, where to go with this, it's to be determined, Harold. I really don't know. I feel like we are on the cusp of something very big, and we could easily expand this into different social media outlets, into a bigger brand. We could, the sky's the limit. I think it will take help. It will take other resources. I think it would take sort of getting serious about it. I mean, I hate to say it in that vein, but I think it will take that. And I think that's what we're now trying to figure out, Daniel and I and Logan, is where do we want to take this? Who can help us to do that and so forth? And we're not in any rush. It's a good thing now. We like it, but I just don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I know that number one for me, the minute it becomes more like a job, it won't be any fun. So I love what we're doing. I love the answering questions. I love it. If we could bring some other people in to help create a business around it to really let it grow and expand, wonderful. If we don't, that's okay too.
It's awesome. I've got to tell you, it's been so impressive starting a business in Lexington, Kentucky, taking the business national, given your media presence and the success of the podcast. You're a great entrepreneur. You've got a tremendous team with Daniel and Logan and the rest of the folks in your organization. And it's a real honor for us to have the opportunity to work with you along the way, get to watch all the great things that you and the team are doing. And it's truly a pleasure since we've had a chance to get to know each other. And I love the podcast. And I suggest everybody else out there be a follower of Quint. If other folks who are listening want to tune into the podcast, where should they go?
Yeah, before I share that, I will say I echo the sentiment, Harold. We have thoroughly enjoyed being part of the Bluespring family. I love it. If there are Bluespring partners listening to this and you have any interest in starting a podcast or growing a podcast or want tips, and I'm happy to chat with you. Your success is our success. Anything we could do to collaborate would be great. So I love that you guys are behind the podcast. You're interested in it's fantastic. So thank you for those compliments, but I can't stress enough how wonderful it is to be part of the family. Any platform that has a podcast should have our podcast. So you can simply type in DIY, David Indigo Yellow, right? Do it yourself, DIY money. And you will be able to find the podcast. You can click subscribe and make sure you give us that 5-star review so that we can move up in the ranks, right?
That's awesome. Yeah, I follow you on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. So very easy to find it. You guys are tremendous. Quint, this has been awesome. And until next time, this is Bluespring Out Loud signing off.